January 30th, 2019. A young son is left devastated when he walks into his parents' bedroom and finds his mother dead. His father is found in the garage, clinging to life but in critical condition. Welcome to Criminal Chaos and the case of Heidi and Michael Winchester. At the time of her death, Heidi, or Annie as her friends and family more affectionately called her, was just 50 years old, with Michael a couple of years younger. They had met 30 years previous in their early 20s and had got married, going on to have 2 sons together. They would go on to raise their 2 sons in the Lake Oswego area of Oregon. This is an affluent suburb for the upper middle and upper class, and although Michael and Annie weren't rich, they were financially stable and lived by all means the American dream. The awful events of this case aren't so much a whodunit, because that comes to light pretty quickly, but the amount of questions that are raised after this are staggering, and the court case is even more mind-blowing than you will imagine. For some context as to how this tragedy played out, we need to go back 8 years to 2011. The family was left heartbroken when Annie was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And their despair was only made worse when they were told this was a terminal cancer, albeit a slow-moving one, but Annie knew her days were numbered. The news was especially hard for Annie and Michael to take, as both their sons weren't even teenagers yet. Throughout the following years, Annie underwent a number of chemotherapies. However, these did leave her feeling ill and drained, unable to live the life she wanted and be there for her sons. Throughout this time, Michael was by her side, always helping her and making sure she had everything she needed. However, because Annie had terminal cancer, she knew the chemotherapies would never end, so it was a constant cycle of feeling ill. This would get her really down on a day-to-day basis. So with that being said, let's jump to the fatal day, January 30th, 2019. It's between 7 and 8 AM when Annie's son, only 18 at the time, goes into his mother's bedroom and sees a horrifying sight. She is quite visibly dead, and even worse, it's a homicide. There is blood absolutely everywhere. His father is nowhere to be seen. He rings 911 immediately and asks for emergency help. Police and paramedics are dispatched and arrive within minutes, but what they encounter leaves even the most seasoned officers shook. As they approach the house, an officer notices the garage door is slightly ajar. He swings it open fully, and in front of him is Annie's husband, Michael. He is in critical condition and barely clinging to life, with huge gashes in his neck. However, he does have the energy to say 6 words. "I killed her. She had cancer." The officer couldn't quite comprehend the situation. Everything was happening so fast. 1 person dead, another nearly dead, and 2 sons absolutely heartbroken. But he did realise that Michael needed emergency medical help if he was going to survive, so he had him taken to the hospital immediately. However, it is worth noting that he was told on scene that he was being arrested for the murder of his wife, although because he was in critical condition, he wasn't formally charged at this point. That came a few days later, in early February. The homicide investigation of Annie commenced pretty much immediately after officers arrived on the scene and dealt with Michael. Annie was sprawled across her bedroom floor, and her neck had been savagely cut multiple times. There was a box cutter knife lying next to her, which appeared to be the weapon that had been used. She really didn't stand a chance. She was up against a much larger man armed with a weapon and in a frail state due to her chemotherapy. Worst of all, This was her husband of 30 years, someone who is meant to love and care for her. Michael said this is exactly what he was doing. He said he was putting her out of his pain, and this is where the twisted court case of Michael Winchester starts. As detectives are securing the scene, they find the first signs of Michael's admissions, a handwritten note addressed to his two sons, explaining why he had took the actions that he had. The note read, "So sorry boys, none of this is fair. I could not bear to watch Mom suffer anymore. I could see no way for me to move forward and live. I knew I could not work anymore with all of this. I could see no way to take care of you. I know the family will take care of you. I am a failure, and none of this is on you guys. You were the best part of my life. I am only sorry that I see no other way. I could not bear to watch my life fall apart, an ill life and no ability to get out of this despair. Mom was having a very emotional day and questioning if God was mad at her. She was so brave." So although that letter doesn't give a full admission from Michael saying he was the one who killed Annie, it's pretty damning, coupled together with the fact that he already told police officers that he was the one who done it. And that letter isn't just a note to his two sons, it's also a suicide letter, because at the time of writing, that is what Michael intended. I've already mentioned that when he was found, he had huge gashes to his neck, and these gashes were actually self-inflicted of several attempted suicide attempts, but these did fail somehow. The gashes were so big and he lost so much blood, it's a miracle that he managed to cling on to life. From what we know, Michael attacked Annie in the early hours of the morning. We don't know if she was asleep at the time, but there is suggestions that she was. If she wasn't, we don't know if they were having an argument or something like this, and it led to it, although the suicide letter wouldn't suggest that was the case, as Michael genuinely believed he was taking Annie out of her pain. But I must say, in the suicide letter, it does seem that Michael mentions his own feelings just as much as Annie's. Numerous times he mentions how down it's making him feel, so we don't really know his motives behind this. He says straight away that he done it because she had cancer, but was it to relieve her of her pain, or was it to relieve him of how he was suffering? What we do know though is that Michael viciously attacked his wife, leaving her deceased. He took a small box-cutter knife and plunged it into her neck numerous times. He then took the same action upon himself, but the outcome wasn't fatal. As I said earlier, Michael was found in the garage. Now I believe this was due to the loss of blood. He was probably in a panic and looking for help, or just disorientated. So at this point, you may think we have the victim, we have the perpetrator, case closed. But it's not quite that simple. Pretty much from the get-go, Michael's sons stood by his side and said this was totally out of character. And the boys may have had good reason for this stance, as what came next supported the fact that this was totally out of character for their father. After his arrest, Michael would be kept in custody for around 6 months, eventually being released in June of 2019 on $250,000 bail. In the meantime, his attorney, Benjamin Kim, had been working hard behind the scenes to get his charges reduced. He was doing this by using the emotional disturbance defense, which can lower a murder charge to first-degree manslaughter and carries a much lesser sentence. And Kim's efforts did seem to be paying off. In May of 2019, ahead of Winchester's release, Clackamas County Circuit Court suggested that the charges would be reduced based on the evidence he had provided. Kim also then released a memo in defense of his client's bail. The memo would read, "The defense anticipates that the evidence will show that every person who spoke to Miss Winchester heard Miss Winchester speak of the severity of her physical and emotional pain. her desire to die and her wish that she could join her loved ones in heaven. The people who knew Miss Winchester were also aware of undiagnosed psychological issues, including the behaviour consistent with a manic-depressive disorder. Kim also went on to argue that Michael Winchester was deeply depressed at the time of taking Annie's life. He says he was hospitalised just 2 months before the murder after experiencing migraines, slurred speech, and the inability to sleep or complete tasks he used to easily perform. After being released, Michael visited some of the top doctors in Oregon to be checked out. The results were startling. It was discovered that Michael was suffering from a rare but serious inflammation of the brain called encephalitis at the time he killed Annie. Encephalitis can be caused by infections or an autoimmune reaction. It causes fever, headaches, confusion and seizures, requiring urgent hospital treatment to prevent brain damage or death. Armed with all of this new information, Michael decided that taking the case to trial would be the best option. He really believed he was doing his wife a favour and putting her out of her misery, and due to the encephalitis, he believed he wasn't even in control of his own actions. He would get his day in court almost 3 years to the day after killing his wife. It was January 2022 when he stood trial, and it seems all of the family weren't as forgiving as his 2 sons. Annie's side of the family specifically were seen chatting to prosecutors on multiple occasions. This does suggest that they were on the prosecutor's side and seen things the same way they did. During the trial, the prosecution and defense painted Michael in 2 very different pictures. The prosecution said he was a cold and callous killer. He cut his wife's neck as she slept, and he was tired of looking after her. They said he knew exactly what he was doing, and the suicide note supported this. They also said it was very self-serving, and Michael should not be given any leniency. In response to this, the defense put on a case with some well-renowned doctors taking a stand and explaining to the jury what encephalitis is and how it affects the brain. They also pointed out that Michael had no history of being abusive towards his wife, a point fully backed up by his 2 sons. The defense also said Michael had stood by his wife's side during years of chemotherapy and never complained once. By killing her, he truly believed he was relieving her of pain. They said the suicide note was being twisted by the prosecution. And with all that being said, the jury were sent to deliberate. On January 7th, 2022, they came back with a verdict. They found Michael Winchester guilty of manslaughter except for reason of insanity. This meant that the jury had found that Michael Winchester killed his wife Annie, which was pretty obvious to us all due to his own admissions and the suicide letter, but it also meant that they felt the defense had overwhelming evidence of Michael's depression and encephalitis, that he wasn't in control of his own actions on that day. It also meant that Michael would serve no prison time. The judge then ordered that Michael Winchester should be evaluated by the Oregon State Hospital to see if he was mentally fit. After this check, it was found that Michael was mentally fit and he was released to the public. There was no sign of the encephalitis anymore, and therefore it was deemed that Michael would be no danger to the public. This case was not widely covered at all, and it has been near impossible to find any updates of what Michael is up to now. I presume now that he's in a better mental state, he struggles daily thinking about what his actions have caused. This case is a very divisive one. I'm sure some of you will think he should be found guilty, others not guilty, and some stuck right in the middle. Please let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Thanks for watching.